Hi everyone, Leo here, and I'm honored to be joined by the famous, infamous, the world great Timothy Ferris.
Yeah, thanks for coming over. This is great.
Yeah, we are actually shooting from within Tim's house in his oxygen room.
Yeah, in the rainforest. This is my Michael Jackson hyperbaric chamber we were talking about.
Yeah.
It's all self-enclosed, so lots of oxygen in the mornings, which is great.
And I got a sneak peek at Tim's new book, which is really exciting.
Gotta be careful not to give myself a hernia.
Yeah, so the 4-Hour Chef.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's huge. I told him to attach a handle so he can swing it like a kettlebell.
Yeah, exactly. It's roughly the same weight as a 4-hour body, so now you can do double bicep curls.
Yeah, but it's actually, I haven't read the book yet, and I can't wait to dive into it, but it sounds like a really fascinating book because it's not really just about cooking.
No, it's a cookbook for learning disguised as a cookbook for food. Yeah. And kind of like Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, because my readers have been asking me for a book on learning skills, because that's sort of my obsession, I guess, is I go off and I'll do Japanese and Chinese language or horseback archery or swimming or basketball or whatever. And there is one recipe that I use for tackling all of those skills. And so what I thought would be really fun is to travel the world, meeting not only some of the world's fastest learners and chess prodigies and things like that, or one gentleman learned Icelandic well enough to be on a TV show in 7 days, stuff like that, and try to figure out the repeatable process they use, but to meet the world's best chefs. And the reason I chose food, a few things. I think everyone likes to eat, or everyone has to eat, number one. Number two, cooking it actually kicked my ass multiple times in the past. I mean, I tried it and quit multiple times because either like the cleanup was too time consuming or whatever it might be. So I thought it'd be fun for readers to see me start from ground zero, sort of Tim Ferris naked. Yeah, is ground zero meaning you really didn't know how to cook? Oh, nothing. I mean, I was ridiculed and have been ridiculed before because I was internet famous at one point for a video that had me microwaving egg white, liquid egg whites in plastic containers, and that was my breakfast. Yeah. And that was the limit of my cooking skill. I mean, I had Emily Olson, who's a really, she's a friend and co-founder of Foodsy, which just sold to Joyous, so all food, right? She's like, hey, we should have dinner at your place. I'll come over, we'll cook, and Rob will bring da-da-da. She came over, she's like, where's your olive oil? I was like, I think it's in the freezer. She goes, freezer? Your olive oil's in the freezer? And I'm like, yeah. She goes, I don't cook much. And no. So really starting from a complete cooking idiot, like resistant anti-cook. But actually thousands of people have followed recipes from you. From the 4-Hour Body. Right, from your last book. And so I do have like the one or two things that I would make for like breakfast. So it'd be like canned lentils, scrambled eggs, something else. And I remember really no cooking required. Nothing beyond that. Yeah. And but there were a couple of things. So number one is it's a skill that even if you test, and we'll get to this because it's a really important concept, but even if you test cooking for 2 weeks, and you never cook again, what I found, and this is because my girlfriend's a really good cook, and I started watching her cook, and I realized you take your experience of food as an eater from like black and white, hot, cold, good, bad, to like HD in a million colors. So it's like to that dramatically enjoy something you do 3 times a day anyway for the rest of your life. Like it's worth toying around with cooking for 2 weeks. The other thing, and this is something maybe you've experienced and maybe you haven't, but over the last few years, I'm doing all this stuff, the digital world, and been very fortunate the last few years, but I just developed this sort of anxiety and digital malaise of sorts where I wanted to make things with my hands. I wanted to do more stuff with my hands, and not just like lifting weights or playing tennis or whatever, but actually building things. And really wanted to reclaim my humanness in that way. And I thought it was going to be woodworking, but I was like, it's too far away, it's in Oakland, it's that, like I don't need a crappy birdhouse in my living room, whatever. So, and then I was, again, watching my girlfriend one, I was like, I can use, like that can be my craft. I can build things. And you can do it right here. And I can do it right here. And so for all those reasons, I thought it would be fun to explore. And the other thing that I noticed once I got into it, and failed many, many times, so it's kind of fun to watch me apply this, because it's never a perfect pitch. Like, I think it's easy for people to like read my bio or read anyone's bio oftentimes, and it's like, wow, that guy's like, he's immortal, he's a mutant, like he does all these amazing things, because people don't put all their failures in their bios typically, right?
Yeah.
But this is like a real world story of sort of start to finish.
So we watch you failing and getting back up.
It opens up with a big failure.
All right. And so by watching this whole process, we learn how to learn.
You learn how to master, become world class, meaning top 5% in the world. And I know this sounds crazy, but like top 5% in the world, like general population, right?
Yeah.
At 1 or 2 skills a year, like very concretely with real world examples and case studies.
All right.
And that's it.
Well, we did something, we'll find that we asked some of my readers to submit questions for you about learning through a Google moderator kind of thing, and then people voted them up and down. So we're going to ask you the top questions. But before I do that, a question just popped into my head. And I want to know this cooking thing. Did it take you 10,000 hours?
I don't think so.
Just out of curiosity.
I don't think it could have.
Yeah.
No.
That would have been years.
Yeah, it would have been years. No, it didn't.
Okay, so we're going to beat the 10,000 hour mark.
Yeah, we can talk about the 10,000 hour mark. I have some issues with it. I think that it's easy to confuse correlation and causation, and I also think that even within the case studies that he cites, I think there's quite a bit of disagreement. So I wouldn't disagree that the people who are the best in the world, Tiger Woods and so forth,
they have
put in 10,000 hours. But I would also point to the fact that if you're in a position with a singular pursuit, there are very few incentives to do less than absolutely the most possible. So much like training, let's just say, well, training to failure is a very effective approach to muscle gain.
Right.
Because you know you're going to catalyze a physiological response. So similarly, I think, like, well, maybe you could do 4 reps, maybe you could do 6 reps, maybe you could do 2.5 reps, but you know at least going to failure works. And so it's a good idea for many people. Yeah, it's a certainty.
Right.
And I think similarly, like, well, if I am competing in a field and my income, my reputation, my family's honor, whatever it is, depends on me being good at it, 2,000 hours might work, 3,000 hours might work, but 10,000 hours is basically doing it all the time. Within the constraints of your schedule and school obligations and work obligations. So you're going to do that.
Yeah.
And I think that it's very easy to confuse correlation with causation. And all I would say is that taking it out of the sort of theoretical debate, like, I can point to people who are direct counterexamples. Yeah. Dozens of them. And I think the 4 Hour Body is a good example where you have people who are maybe not getting to the top, the top 1% in the world, but who train 8 weeks at low volume and run marathons successfully without injury. That's not supposed to be possible, but it is possible, and you determine that by looking for the anomalies, right? The people who very often get discounted from statistical analysis because they're X number of standard deviations away from the mean or the mode. So. Anyway, I could go on and on, but no, I didn't put in 10,000 hours.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go for the first question. It's from Edward of London, and he got 78 votes, plus votes for this one. So,
right.
All right. The question is, what is your set protocol for when you catch yourself procrastinating? Good topic.
That's a great topic. I am a professional procrastinator. I'm really good at it.
You get paid to do it.
I get paid to do it. Well, in a way... I think writers will do anything to avoid writing. Speaking for myself.
Yeah.
So Ayn Rand, otherwise known as, Anne Rand, wrote a book at one point called, I think it was How to Write Nonfiction. Something like that.
All right.
How-to book. And I haven't read all too much of her stuff, but in this particular book, it had the white tennis shoes phenomenon, and which referred to writers noticing when they're about to sit down to write, like, oh, my white tennis shoes are really filthy. Like, I should really clean that. I should really clean that up. And so they go over and scrub the tennis shoes because that can't wait.
Yeah.
And here's how I deal with procrastination. Or let me take a step back. I deal with procrastination the same way I deal with binging on a diet.
All right.
And that is by scheduling for it. I allow it. I expect it. And I think where people get very, very anxious and very stressed out and ultimately get even worse results is when they they assume that they can get rid of procrastination if they just have the right tool, if they just have the right new system, if they just have the right new app. And I think humans, for whatever reason, have evolved to procrastinate many things. I don't know why. And at least in my own life, I do procrastinate. I know historically I've not been successful at getting rid of it. So I budget certain buffers for it. So for instance, slow carb diet, I still do my cheat days. I love my cheat days.
Yeah, Saturdays?
Saturdays, I walk right down the hill here and I have a bear claw and probably 2 chocolate croissants, make myself a little sick, have some grapefruit juice, coffee, I love it. Pizza, I love it. So every week I have that release valve. When I write, for instance, my best synthesis, and I'd be curious to know, when do you write during the day?
In the morning.
In the morning. When? Yeah. What time of day?
Between 8 and 10.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So I found that almost every writer I know who consistently produces work does it either first thing in the morning or last thing. Mm-hmm. And they tend to operate, in most cases, you're pretty close, tend to operate between 10 p.m. and 8 a.m., whatever time zone they're in. A lot of them. And I think that's because the rest of the world's either asleep or away from the internet, at least your friends. And for me, that's the only time that I can synthesize. So my schedule, for instance, when writing this book and for the 4-Hour Body, is to do sort of not menial, but heavy lifting tasks like interviews, research, during the day when I know I'm far more likely to procrastinate.
Yeah.
And then I do my synthesis starting at about 10 p.m. I boil my water, I get my yerba mate ready, I have a glass of wine, and then I sit down, and my method is turn on a movie that I've seen many times already, so usually Casino Royale, Shaun of the Dead, one of those, mute it just so I don't feel isolated, because I find writing very isolating. And then I have maybe 10 tracks that I'll loop, and I'll listen to the same 10 tracks over and over again, which was a tip I got from Matt Mullenweg of WordPress. He listens to sometimes one track over and over again. But the point being, I expect I'm going to procrastinate, so I don't pack my schedule with the expectation that any new tool is going to prevent it.
Yeah.
I provide a lot of wiggle room.
So you sit down, you've got your ritual, you got everything set up, your tracks playing, your movie looping.
Yeah.
But when you sit down and start to write, do you still face resistance there? And
sure. Okay.
Urge to go and check something else?
Of course. Yeah. I mean, my signature move is drinking so much water that I have to go to the bathroom like every 10 minutes. That's like one of my stupid subconscious procrastinating methods.
Yeah.
But I would say there are 2 things I do. Number one is, again, when I sit down, I know that I have very little time pressure. Like I have 5 or 6 hours in a block. And I think this is true of most programmers I've met also, that to really get into the zone, that could take you an hour and a half, to for me at least, to just get to the point where I'm actually flowing. So I don't if I'm fidgety and kind of fussing with papers and organizing windows for the first hour, I'm like, that's okay. That's part of the process.
Just kind of getting comfortable.
Yeah, it's just I don't have a panic response. The second thing is that I set this is actually maybe the most important thing, is I set very low quotas for myself. And I'll come back to that as it applies to writing. So there was a period of time, a long period of time, maybe a decade or so, where IBM, when they were selling mainframes and whatnot, had the most successful direct sales force, arguably in the country. And one of the reasons cited for them being the most successful is that they had the lowest quotas. And you'd be like, that's weird. You would think it'd be the opposite.
Yeah.
And the way it was explained by management was, because their quotas are low, they're not intimidated to get started.
Yeah.
They're not intimidated to
because the getting started is the most important part.
Exactly. And so for writing, I had at one point I was hitting a really rough patch with the 4-Hour Body. I find writing really hard. I mean, I really do. And I hit a super rough patch with the 4-Hour Body, and I was just sort of in a mental breakdown mode. And I met a ghostwriter who'd written 60 books, and he had his entire process and method down. And so I sat down, I talked to him, bought him a bunch of wine, interviewed him for an hour or 2.
Yeah.
And he said, the most important thing I can tell you is 2 crappy pages per day. That is your goal. If you write 2 crappy pages, you win. Your day is a success. Do not increase that page count. Don't make it 5,000 words, don't make it 3,000 words. 2 crappy pages. And of course, once you get started, you oftentimes end up writing more.
Yeah.
But there are going to be tough days. And sometimes I'd have tough days and I'd cheat. I'm not going to lie. I'd be like, let me bump up the font size on that headline. Let me
increase the margins.
Let me throw in a picture just to make sure it fits. I'd be like, okay, I got my 2 pages.
Yeah, all right. But you got started.
But then the next day, I wasn't like, oh my God, now I have twice as much to do just to catch up.
Oh, right.
Now I'm twice as inclined to procrastinate and put it off.
Right, if it keeps piling up.
Exactly. So,
a higher barrier, basically.
Yeah, exactly. So I'd say low quotas and budgeting for human nature as opposed to trying to conquer it is really, really important.
And you're still drinking Malbec?
Oh, well, I drink all sorts of wine.
Okay.
I do love Malbec, though. I do love Malbec, but I'll tell you, those rats, because it's become popular, there's a lot of crappy Malbec coming out.
Okay.
Because people are trying to, just like Pinot, when Pinot Noir became popular after Sideways, a bunch of crappy Pinot Noir came out. So I really like Carmenere and Tempranillo out of Chile, actually.
All right.
And Riojas out of Spain, I've become very fond of. I still like good Malbec, of course. Zinfandel, too. Very similar to Malbec.
All right.
Anyway, I love Zinfandel.
I like all those.
Yeah, they're all good.
And 1 or 2 tracks from your loop.
Oh, all right. Well, I think, do you listen to the same music that you did when you were in, like, late high school?
Probably.
You know what I mean? So it's like, I always imagine, like grandpas, comforting. I always imagine, like, friends of mine who listen to like hardcore rap now because they listened to it in high school, like when they're like 80 and like they'll be listening to like gangster rap. Actually borrowing that from Nick Schwartz, and he's a stand-up comic. But I listen to let's see, I tend to listen to electronica, which is like old school way to refer to it, but so that might range from like Eyes on Fire, Zed's Dead remix, which is great. Blue Foundation I like also. And then I listened to some heavier stuff like Sevendust, which I used one of their tracks for the trailer for the 4 Hour Body.
All right.
Super like heavy metal stuff.
Gets you kind of pumped up. Maybe.
Gets me pumped. I can't listen to anything no matter how well I know it. Like let's say Bob Marley with slow lyrics. It totally scrambles. Well,
with the
brain.
Wine, you might be.
With the wine and just writing, I can't listen to it. It scrambles my brain. In the morning, if I do any type of synthesis in the morning, which I very rarely do, but if I'm experimenting with that, which I've done in the past, I'll listen to Beethoven.
All right.
It's the only time that I listen to Beethoven.
All right.
And for whatever reason, it just works for me in the mornings.
Maybe we'll give that a try.
Yeah.
Okay, so next question, Justin from New York City. If someone has a full-time job, how can they balance that with learning something new? In your Watch in the Day of a Life episode, you say you can only put 3 to 4 months into something. How are you supposed to do that when we have 9-to-5 job, family, and etc.?
Yeah, okay. So the 3 to 5 months is just, that is a personal thing, which maybe it wasn't conveyed well in the Day in the Life, which was fun, actually. That was a really fun thing to film. But
sure.
By saying 3 to 4 months, that means that in general, I will focus on a subject intensely for 3 to 4 months, get to ideally like the top decile, like top 10% in the general population. Then I'm like, that's great. Like now I thoroughly enjoy, let's say, shooting basketball, which is something, for instance, I was subconscious about it, never thought I could ever be decent at it for my entire life because I was actually ridiculed by a PE coach in junior high. And so I chose that as one of the things I wanted to try to tackle for the 4 Hour Chef. I was like, let me take all the things I've assumed I can't do and just try them out. But once I get to that 90th percentile, I'm like, okay, this is great. Like I can have fun with this.
Yeah.
I'm not aiming to be an NBA pro. Let me move on. Okay. To do that, now keep in mind, so I would say there's no problem with balancing a full-time job with doing that. Because keep in mind, I was writing,
that's your full-time job.
This is
basketball.
This is a full-time job.
Yeah.
This is 672 pages, team of about 40 people. This is a major startup.
Yeah.
Dozens of photographers, teams around the world working on this thing. And then I would have to wedge in the experimentation. So it was absolutely a full-time job. This is after cutting 250 pages.
Yeah. So how did you do it, though? How did you wedge in the basketball or whatever else you were
schedule it. So I would schedule it. And in this case, for instance, there's a basketball court not too far from here. And this might sound weird, but I would treat visualization as almost as effective as actual shooting. So I would take time, if I weren't able to physically go to the basketball court, to visualize the technique, 90-degree angle between wrist and forearm, 90-degree angle between upper arm and forearm, having the shot pocket here, the actual shot line, so it's a vertical line, testing my eye dominance. So I realized I was cross-eye dominant, which meant that if I moved my shot line over just very subtly, like a half inch, all of a sudden all those like bing, bing, bouncing off just by testing eye dominance. And it was like swoosh, swoosh,
wow.
swoosh. It was crazy. I would practice here with like garbage cans.
Yeah.
Right. And it's not, this is where I take issue with practice does not make perfect. Practice makes permanent. This is where I take issue with the 10,000 hour rule. So like deliberate practice is a term that gets thrown around, but I think we need to define what we mean by that very carefully, because not all practice is created equal. So I would rather practice less, but correctly and intelligently, than practice more and develop any indirect or direct bad habits. So that's a long-winded way of saying that I might have actually only gone to the basketball court for like 2 hours a week. And if you should be able to fit that in, even with a full-time job.
It's doable.
If you can't, then you don't have your priorities in line.
Yeah.
And if you can't get to the basketball court, pick something else to practice. If you really cannot spare 2 hours a week, in which case I would say there are bigger problems at play, then...
Would you usually focus on one of those at a time, basketball, and then focus on something else after you're done with basketball?
I would usually.
Yeah.
Part of the challenge with this is I had like 20 things to do at once.
Oh.
It's actually really hard because books have deadlines. Books have deadlines.
Yeah.
Right? And so I was working on, let's say, knife skills, basketball, marksmanship. What else is in here? You name it.
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
marksmanship with a gun.
With a gun, with bow and arrow as well.
All right.
And just did a sniping course in Los Angeles last weekend, which was really wild with a couple of LA SWAT team guys. But what you realize is, as you look across all of these, is that the things that make the best in each of those fields are very similar.
Yeah.
Very, very similar. Whether it's like for instance, this is actually really cool. One thing I do want to say is this looks like a really intimidating monster, but isn't it pretty, the color coding? This is a choose your own adventure book, right? Just like the last book. So I don't expect anyone to read more than 100 pages of this, even though I cut 250 pages. But what I was going to say is, so with the basketball, this is really fun. So when I was home for, I don't know what it was, Thanksgiving or something, to New York, I was practicing outside and getting kind of frustrated. And then I sank one shot and I was like, I think I figured out something. And I was like, all right, well, it's time to go, because we were going bowling. And we went bowling, and I never bowl. It's like once every 2 years kind of thing. But I'm terrible. I'm actually surprisingly bad. And when I say surprisingly, it seems like I would have to work to be as bad as I am. And because I'd been training in the basketball and thinking in terms of certain lines and angles and biomechanics, I scored consistently, like game after game, over 100 for the first time in my life, immediately after practicing the basketball. And then I went home after doing the bowling, and I hit my first three-pointer.
All right.
It's so wild. Like, just the unexpected transfer is really, really cool. And similarly, like if you learn about knife skills, like most of the rules that apply to good cooking and sort of managing your cutting board, like a Minority Report surface, apply to like surgery, right? Like the less you move your feet, the more accurate you'll be.
Yeah.
The closer you keep your elbows to your sides, the faster you can move. Like just all these cool things.
So you're also doing surgery.
Also doing surgery. There was part that didn't make it into the book. I wanted to learn how to. I liked finding the parallels in different worlds, so I thought, like, what if I could teach someone how to sew their toe back on in like an emergency, and that would help them sew up a turkey or something. Okay. So I actually did get an ER physician to come in, and we got pig's feet and practiced suturing on pig's feet.
Wow.
Did not make it into the book, but I have video.
So have you saved the uncut book?
I have all that material, yeah.
Yeah, well, that could be a whole nother release.
I know, 250, jeez.
No, just the ebook part of it, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
People who are obsessed with you, they want to.
Yeah, man. Well, I have a lot.
Everything.
Yeah, I'll be sharing a lot of that extra stuff.
All right.
Some really fun stuff.
Okay, let's go to the next one. I don't know how to say the name. It's PKPK from NYC. Do rules set us free? More specifically, is habit essential when trying to be productive?
Say that one more time, please.
Do rules set us free? More specifically, is habit essential when trying to be productive?
All right.
I guess they're talking about structure, habit.
I can answer that. So I think this is also a rather personal thing. So different people respond well to different types of environments. Speaking personally, I've looked a lot recently at what's called ego depletion or decision fatigue, which are actual studies. These are controlled studies performed in university settings where they look at how making many decisions affects our ability to make subsequent decisions, or how making, let's say, holding decisions in working memory affect our ability to recall certain types of data. And what you find is if you're forced to decide, let's say, between like the types of toothpaste you want, like 100 types of toilet paper or whatever, if you're making all of those constant decisions about relatively unimportant things, your ability to perform on the most important items is dramatically reduced.
You have like a battery that gets drained.
Yeah, exactly. You have like a number of hit points. And so for me, I try to build as much structure into my life as possible so that I only use my creativity where it is most valuable. So I have like rules and protocols, out the wazoo, but I don't feel constricted by it. I find those positive constraints very helpful. And I think that you can dramatically accelerate your productivity and progress when you constrain.
Yeah.
So for instance, if I'm like, you can't use everything in the grocery store, no, forget it. You can't use all the things in your kitchen, nope, forget it. You can't even use a knife, let's say that. You can't even use a knife. You get a couple things. You get a fish spatula, it's called a Peltex, a lot of chefs use it. You get a blue surgical huck towel, no pot holders. You get 2 towels. You get a cast iron Dutch oven skillet combo, grapeseed oil, and then in terms of like herbs and spices, you don't really get any of those either. You get lemon, you get sherry vinegar, champagne vinegar, and then you get either olive oil or grapeseed oil, and a couple of types of salt, a couple of types of pepper, and you have to cook with that. That's all you get. And you can make the most amazing food if you constrain people like that, because it forces them to get better at technique. And I think very similarly, at least in my work life, I find that if I constrain, like with writing, if I apply constraints, certain length, certain types of paragraph format, if I force myself to limit the interview portion of it to 1/3, the product is better because I apply those parameters. But it's a very personal thing. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, I've actually written a book on how limits and constraints can increase everything.
Yeah, I think even as an exercise, it's very valuable. And I view all of life as an exercise, right? So my life is a series of 1 or 2 week experiments. And if it works, great, I keep it.
Yeah.
If it doesn't work, then I don't keep it. Or I tweak it and I try again. And I think that's how you slowly build up a system that works for yourself, is not viewing anything, whether it's a diet, exercise regime, or anything, as permanent. Because why? That's like having a high quota for IBM.
Yeah.
You put it off. For me at least, I find that's the way. The way I get someone who's 150 pounds overweight to lose 150 pounds is by saying, don't worry about exercise. Don't worry about changing your diet. All I want you to do is get 30 grams of protein within 30 minutes of waking up. That's it. You don't have to change anything. Protein shake. And here's a link on Amazon. Buy it with Prime. There you go. Put it in your fridge. And starting with those small behavioral modifications and one change at a time. So one of the reasons, for instance, I guess I'm kind of going all over the place, but one of the reasons that people fail in business, one of the reasons people fail in relationships, I think, one of the reasons people fail in cooking, for instance, is they try to change multiple behaviors at once. So when people think of cooking, what they're actually thinking of is grocery shopping, prep, cooking, cleanup, hosting. Like, people try to tackle 5 things at once, so of course they fail.
Yeah.
It's like BJ Fogg at the Persuasion Lab at Stanford, or other people have looked at, if you try to get people to quit smoking, let's say they're over the age of 40 or 50, get them to quit smoking by using texting, doesn't work. Why? Because you're asking them to quit smoking and learn to text. So, what if you could remove the grocery shopping, remove the cleanup, remove all these elements, and just focus on the cooking? You're going to get really good at cooking. And then you add in one more. So I think that having those constraints, for me at least, is hugely liberating, if anything else.
Yeah, I've actually done a bunch of research on my own with students learning habits.
Yeah.
And one habit at a time is pretty much what most people can do.
Oh yeah, it's the domino.
I mean, one habit by itself is pretty tough, and people think they can do 5 to 10 of them.
Oh yeah, one is hard enough. You don't have to try to do 5 to 10. We did get the 5-minute warning.
All right, so let's try and get 1 or 2 more in if we can.
Sure.
We'll make these quick ones. From AQ of Indiana, do you know any secrets to self-imposed moderation for alcohol, food, or anything really? And this is actually to add my own personal thing.
Yeah.
Like, I'm good at when I have an environment, like my home, I can set up the environment so that moderation's easy.
Yeah.
But you go to some place where, like, it's unlimited choices, like a party or something like that.
Yeah.
Moderation can be tough.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I think if anything, I'm sort of the king of excess in every possible way. So for moderation, I'll try to give a short answer. What I have found really helpful, and full disclosure, I'm involved with this company, but Lyft, the app Lyft, has been hugely helpful for me. And what Lyft is an app that was incubated by the guys from Twitter, so Evan, Biz, and those guys.
Yeah.
And Ev reached out to me, and I ended up getting involved with the company, and it's very minimalist. And you can create your own habits, and all you do is you log in, and if people like what you're doing, they give you a prop. It's super simple. Well, it is the only thing, for instance, and I know this isn't related to moderation, but I'll come back to that. It's the only thing that has consistently gotten me to floss my teeth.
All right.
And it's like, I've tried it over and over and over again in my life, and I always end up dropping it. And it's like, every time you go to the dentist, floss your teeth. Every time I go home, my mom, floss your teeth. And it's like, this has always been the message. I want to do it, I just don't do it. And so the combination of Lyft and then ultimately getting the water pick, which is an amazing machine, just like shoots water through your teeth, it's great, allowed me to do it. Now what Lyft also allows me to do is like no alcohol. And so for each day, it's like no alcohol. No alcohol.
So you have a
So I have a tracker and a little check-in.
Yeah.
And for me, I find, and maybe this is helpful for people.
Yeah.
I find that it's easier to get to moderation if you go to 0 first.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So if I'm like drinking 4 or 5 glasses of wine a night, and I'm not gonna lie, there are like periods where like maybe I'm having a really tough time writing, or maybe I'm just having a tough time with other things. And it's like, I'll have, a bottle is more than 1 or 2 glasses. So I'll be like, what's it gonna hurt, And I'll end up drinking too much, and then I'll get to a point where I'm like, you know what, this isn't healthy. I need to stop drinking like this.
So you'll set some.
I'll go to 0. And
0 is better than.
Well, what'll happen is I'll go to 0, and for let's say 7 to 10 days, and then I'll go back to 2 glasses. Yeah. And I find it much easier than if I try to go from excess to slightly dialing back.
Because you kind of remove the mental need for it.
Yeah, it's kind of like
you kind of think you need it.
Yeah, it's like an elimination diet for habits, right? Yeah. So you take everything away and then you slowly add it back in. And I'll do that with diet too. Like if I'm like, my God, I'm getting fat or whatever.
From all the cooking and eating.
Yeah, oh man, it's hard to stay lean when you go to restaurants and you want to develop a relationship with the chefs. They send out free desserts and you're like,
my God.
Oh man. But so anyway.
The diet starts after the launch of the book.
So then I'll go like 7 to 10 days strict slow carb.
Yeah. And
then if I want to start adding in the occasional like baguette or whatever because I have to for like becoming involved with these chefs, then I'll do it.
Yeah.
So that'd be my thought.
Okay, one more. All right, this is from Andrea from Berkeley. Learning something new involves memory. How important is a good memory in learning, and how can I improve my memory? So do you agree with that? Learning something new involves memory, and how important is that?
These are all really big questions.
Yeah.
So I'll try to speak quickly, like micro machine style. So they're different, and I'm really a fan of like the surgical strike, like thinking hard first so you don't have to work harder unnecessarily later. There are different types of things to learn. For instance, you have declarative knowledge, which is like memorizing facts and figures. So like vocabulary items, memorizing a shuffled deck of cards, whatever. And I teach all that stuff. Then you have procedural knowledge, which is like riding a bike, physical stuff, tennis serve, whatever. Then you have weird combinations of those, like writing Chinese characters, where you have both. And the approach is different in each case. What I would say is, for declarative memory, which is I think probably what she means, like facts and figures and whatnot, there are very easy ways to build your memory. And I mean, I go through all of them in the book that I think are most highly leveraged and lightweight to learn. But if you look at any of like Harry Lorayne's stuff, Loryne, he has tons of different mechanisms. The loci mnemonic, for instance, which is the memory palace technique, which was used as long ago as in the Roman Empire, probably before, by Cicero and whatnot for Senate debates. All of these are at your disposal, and you can get very good very quickly. In terms of, is a good memory necessary for learning? If we're talking about acquiring skills that involve some type of movement or component, no, not at all.
There's muscle memory.
Yeah, it's muscle memory, or it's following directions, right?
Okay.
Which is why you need, just like you need, well, you shouldn't say you need, but just like a recipe is very helpful for having a predictive outcome in food, having a recipe for learning something like a tennis serve, or a recipe for getting to 20 laps in freestyle stroke.
Yeah.
It should be that simple. And in that case, you don't need a good memory at all. You need to
follow a few steps.
You need like a logical progression. So by the time you get to the end point, it seems like second nature.
Yeah.
And but obviously, a good memory never hurts. So
yeah.
And there are pharmacological, sort of biochemical ways, smart drugs and whatnot that you can use to also dope pretty effectively if you want to accelerate things. But
there's also, maybe she's referring to learning things at school where you have to like learn, physics or something. You have to memorize a ton of things.
Yeah, I think that certainly factual knowledge, the method of presentation is really important. So even if I'm studying, when I was studying skills or classes in college, one of the things that I did is I would actually look for the best reviewed short books on that subject and read them outside of the textbooks. Because I found that the way they were presented in those books, intended to be commercial, were oftentimes much more effective than textbooks. So I would say augment your textbooks also. Use Khan Academy, potentially.
All right.
And otherwise, quick tip is take a 5-minute break every 45 minutes of studying. There's something called the primacy recency effect, and you can really accelerate, or increase, I should say, your amount of retention by taking these planned breaks.
All right, great.
Cool.
And so I've got dozens of questions. We could go on all day.
Yeah.
But luckily, there's actually another place where we can find out more from you about learning.
Yeah, yeah.
Which is the 4-Hour Chef.
Yeah, exactly.
So, you've actually written a book on the topic.
I know, I did, and I'm proudest of this book. I'm really having fun with it because I had a few friends I've known forever who don't BS me, who read this and advanced copy, and they said it's their favorite of the 3 books.
And you really put yourself into this one.
Really proud of this. I put more into this one than either of the last 2 books because it's so near and dear to me. And like we've talked about this before, but life is short, and I'm 35 now. I've had some close friends pass away from illness and accidents, and you're to really just, I think, squeeze the most out of life. You want to have the sharpest tool upstairs possible, and there are easy ways to improve learning speed. And I think that not only for yourself, but passing that on to your friends or your family can have a really powerful effect. And I know that my mom taught me some of these techniques that I'm still using today. And so to that extent, I'd say whether it's the 4-Hour Chef or looking at people like Richard Feynman, the physics teacher, like really start exploring learning and take pleasure in that discovery process. But 4hourchef.com, sample chapters, fun videos.
And it's going to be on Amazon, right?
It's going to be on Amazon, some indie bookstores. It's the first major acquisition of Amazon Publishing, so it's being boycotted by Barnes & Noble and a bunch of the retailers, which I'm actually psyched for it. It means I get to do all sorts of
cool things.
So, but Amazon's the best place to get it. And it's really designed, this is actually kind of just a quick side note. Digital is great, and we do have a great digital version. But the way I designed the book, and I didn't realize this until kind of recently, is to be looked at as a spread, left and right. And when you're reading something digitally, you don't get a spread. You get one page at a time.
Right.
So I would say.
And you can have this in the kitchen.
This can take anything. And I would like to make maybe one offer, if that's okay.
All right.
Which is, if you'd like to do a 2-hour, so a lot of questions left, right? So if people would like to do a 2-hour Q&A with me, no holds barred, they can ask anything they want. live Q&A. I'll have some wine.
Be careful about that offer.
No. They'll ask it anyway, so it doesn't matter. So 2-hour Q&A with me. Just get 3 copies of the print edition of the 4-Hour Chef. 2 as gifts since it's a holiday book. And send the Amazon email receipt to 3books@4hourchef.com. Just like the number.
3books at 4hourchef.com.
Yep, the number 3 and the number 4. So number 3 books at number 4 hourchef.com, and then you'll get an invite.
Just email the receipts.
Yeah, email the Amazon receipt for 3 print books to that email, and then we'll have some wine and have a jam session.
All right.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Tim.
Cool. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, everyone.